Hey guys, welcome to the We Ship It podcast. On this podcast, we talk about the famous literary couples of history, and we are super excited to share our first episode with you.
Yes, so for our first episode, we are going to be talking about none other than Romeo and Juliet. Do we ship them? Do we not? Some of the underlying themes of their relationship and the text, and after that, we are going to announce the topic for our next episode. So stick around, please stick around till the end for that.
Yay! Oh, so much fun. Hey guys, I'm Steph.
And I'm Devin.
And welcome to the We Ship It podcast. So today, like we mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about Romeo and Juliet. And this is a super exciting moment for us because it's our first episode ever. Yay! So we're really excited you're here. Welcome. And basically what the We Ship It podcast is all about, we're going to be talking literary or the famous literary couples of history, as well as couples that you guys might ship from TV shows or movies or anything like that. So we really want to get engaged with you guys. And as you're listening, please feel free to send in your comments. Our email is weshipitpodcast@gmail.com, and we would love to engage with you. But hopping into our Romeo and Juliet discussion, we have a few questions that we're going to be going through, and me and Devin are going to be talking a little bit more about it. So we're super excited that you guys are here with us today, and let's talk about whether or not Romeo and Juliet sink or float. I don't know. Something about a ship. Okay, so our first question. Why did we choose Romeo and Juliet? And Devin, I don't know if you want to hop into that just a little bit.
Yeah, I would love to. So I think the main reason we kind of chose this one is because the Romeo and Juliet story is just so ingrained in us. It's in our music, it's in our movies, it's in tons of literature, repeated again and again. Even if you've never read it before, which if you haven't, like, why haven't you?
Get with it.
So I think you could probably walk up to anyone on the street and they would probably be like, yes, I understand who Romeo and Juliet are. And because their names are so classic, their story is also coined with their name. So you kind of get the gist of it. It's the boy meets girl or star-crossed lovers kind of archetype, the story that goes along with it. And it has been used for decades, maybe even more. And I think its development has spanned from like Disney movies to even vampires, and is even incorporated into the music that we listen to. I think it's just crazy how it twists and binds its way throughout our entire lives, and we don't even really realize it.
Yeah. No, those references are all over. Like Romeo and Juliet, whether it's like a theme reference to the star-crossed lover or literally down to the word, like when you call someone a Romeo, you mean like they're desperately in love. Sometimes you mean wimpy, and sometimes you mean like a lover boy.
Right.
And these terms have been kind of ingrained in our culture, so I think you're 100% right about that. But yeah, so something that I kind of wanted to talk about, I don't necessarily think and believe, so just so the fans or whoever's listening to this knows this, I don't necessarily think that there are that many people out there fangirling over Romeo and Juliet anymore.
No, absolutely not.
I don't, and this isn't like the main, like, so the main purpose of We Ship It is to talk about couples that have been impactful. And sometimes that's going to look like couples that made us swoon and made us really excited. But sometimes that's also going to talk about literary couples that, I don't know, that changed things in our culture. And Romeo and Juliet did just that.
100%.
Their relationship shows its face in many of the relationships we'll be talking about in the future. And I think you kind of mentioned that, Devin, with the references that we see in our own culture.
Do we have to remind you about Taylor Swift's classic love story?
You're right. Her original works. But yeah, no, it just, the Romeo always comes up. And the Juliet always comes up. Like, this is just something that in English classes you learn to talk about ever since high school.
One of my favorite discussions with my students, either towards the end of Romeo and Juliet or even after we finish reading it in class, is like where do you see this story in our culture today? And they're always so passionate about it. They usually search up the songs, and then I'll play them out loud for everyone. And we'll do like a little, like, not a party, but like we'll just like be able to relax a bit since we've already gone through the whole text or mostly. So they get really passionate about it. I don't know. I don't understand.
That's so great. And like I remember kind of getting passionate about it in high school too.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of now like understand why, and I understand why as you grow you kind of like out phase it. I don't know how to explain that.
Yes and no. Like there's
But do you know
parts of
what I
it.
mean? Like yeah, the story is so like it's ingrained in us. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely is. I'm not going to say it's not.
Right.
But at the same time, like there are parts of it that you can realize you can recognize as maybe not the healthiest as you grow. Whereas in
Yes,
high
very much.
school, like
Very much.
it's not so obvious to us when we're reading it.
Because that's
But
what expected. But
so
we'll get into that.
yeah, and we'll get into all of that. But so basically, the last thing that I'll say on this is this story brings up a lot of debate. And we're actually going to be talking about some really heated comments that we got from our audience later in the show. And it really does bring up the debate of was this truly a love story? Is love at first sight a real thing? And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more later, which I'm excited to hear
Me
what
too.
you
I'm
have to
really
say about
excited for
it,
that.
Devin. But maybe we should move on to the next question.
All right. So the next question is, why is it essential to watch Shakespeare and to not just read Shakespeare?
Mm, this is a great question. And like I said earlier, I think we're going to be talking a lot about Shakespeare's purpose in this, more
Mm-hmm.
than we're going to be talking about their lovey dovey moments, because there are only so many when it comes to Romeo and Juliet. And also, as we're going to talk about later, some of them aren't that great. So just talking about Shakespeare's purpose, I think, is a huge thing behind them in general. And I would say, when it comes to Shakespeare, when it comes to reading the text, first of all, with our modern like way of speaking, it's really hard to read. But um, Shakespeare, the way that it was experienced when it was first experienced was in play form. It was
Mm-hmm.
experienced in real life. It wasn't just people reading the text. Sometimes people didn't even know how to read the text. So it was just something that was meant to be engaging an audience. And it adds a whole, yeah, it adds a whole level of drama. And like I said before, the wording's kind of hard to grasp as you're reading it. So it just adds a whole new level and new perspective when you see it in person.
Yeah, you're talking about people that probably, like you said, have never read before. So there'd be no way for them to really grasp if it was handed, like the text, if it was handed to them. So Shakespeare was meant to be performed. It was meant to be seen and meant to be heard. Um, and usually, when it comes to my classes, like my students are sometimes too nervous to even perform it or to read it in class. But once they get into it, they realize how much better it is for them to actually understand the text and to be a part of the text. That's what's meant to be. Like, you want to be a part of the relationships that are happening in front of you.
100%. And that's why Shakespeare, I think we're going to be talking a lot about different relationships in Shakespeare, because they're ultimately a lot more dramatic than you'll find in a novel, but that's because they were meant to be portrayed. They were meant to be lived through, and I think it's just a completely different thing when you live through that with a person on a stage than through the lines,
A whole
like
spin
spin
on it.
on
Yeah,
this relationship in
completely.
general. But yeah, and like you said, like it's a language thing, but it's also like, have you ever had a texting argument or a texting conversation and you just don't
Because
get
you
all the
don't
emotion
get
out of
it.
it? Exactly. That's how I view a lot of Shakespeare, because
Yeah,
people just don't get the
that's
emotion
happened to me
behind stuff.
before.
Yeah, and it's
Or
tough to
even just
like,
emails, not even texting, just emails. Like, some you could like
yeah,
rewording
you're like,
something
were they
poorly.
passive aggressive or
Yeah.
what? So that's why we have emojis now, but Shakespeare didn't have emojis, so it's hard to follow their relationship sometimes and understand it. But moving on,
Mm-hmm.
the next question that we have is, why do you think Romeo and Juliet has become the centerfold of literary romantic relationships?
Hmm. It's interesting. Because we've been talking about how it's just become like a centerpiece. It's become like the cornerstone of a lot of texts. I think that's almost because of like how we've incorporated it into our lives. Um, I mean, we say when we get married, like, till death do us part, right? So it showcases that idea so well and presents the question of whether um, this kind of love is beautiful or if it's unhealthy. Like, um, in Romeo and Juliet, like, is their love something to be admired, or is it something that you're like, it's a little, all right.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into that later with some of the comments. I'm really excited to like show people what other people who have read the text feel about it. But I think when it comes to Romeo and Juliet, like it captivates a lot of people, even if we're talking about it like, oh my gosh, Romeo and Juliet right now. I still think there's something within all of us that this love story captivates us. And that is if you read it as a love story. But there's something enticing about the idea that you love someone so much that you would die for them. And I think that's a very real, super unhealthy, but sometimes real desire that people have to be someone's one and only. And I think that's why this story really touches people's hearts in a
You also have
different
to think
way.
about the protagonists too. Um, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's set in their teenage years. So,
Yep.
um, one of the most followed after things that comes with teenagers is drama. So,
Yep.
like, students,
Romeo's a drama queen.
he is. So students get like really into the idea, but once they start to analyze the text and the characters, they see like the cracks in it all, and it just like almost falls apart
Mm-hmm.
in a sense too.
Right. And that's why I think it's so important that high schoolers are reading about this
Oh,
relationship
100%.
because as a teenager, I used to actually kind of love Romeo's devotion to Juliet even if I wouldn't admit it. But as you like analyze it with a teacher, as you analyze it with a friend, you realize that maybe this isn't the way, like the best way to love someone and maybe it's not true love. And I think that that's something that is such a coming of age topic that will never get old. And that's why it's important for students to read this, but in a healthy,
Right.
analytical sort of way. You know what I mean?
And I think this idea of love, although poorly like constructed in their minds, the idea behind it, like the conquering of a feud, especially in like today's day and age, the conquering of a feud with love, um, provides us with a sense of like hope, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And something that I just want to add at the end of this, this is one of Shakespeare's most known works. I mean, it's irrefutable at this point. And my question, this is like I didn't prepare Devin for this question. Why do you think this is his most known work? Why not Hamlet? Like Hamlet's up there. Why not Macbeth? Why is Romeo and Juliet what so many people think of when they hear Shakespeare's name?
I think it's because of the age of the protagonists, like Romeo and Juliet. They're in their like I said before, they're in their teenage years. So everyone kind of obviously everyone experiences the teenage and the angst and the everything goes up, the hormones and everything goes along with that. So I think that's why everyone can kind of relate to them in some manner. Um, and also the like the overarching feud that goes on between the two houses. I think that is a big piece that kind of like translate to any type of history. Um, that's my thought. Because like you said, like it is one of his most favored works. I mean, there's Hamlet, there's Midsummer Night's Dream, there's Macbeth, but like everyone kind of comes back to Romeo and Juliet. And it's like, oh my gosh, remember that? Like, and I think that's really
And I
cool.
think 100%. And I think there's something a lot deeper about Romeo and Juliet. Like
Hmm.
obviously Shakespeare gets deep in a lot of plays. I mean, you see Hamlet talking to himself about to be or not to be, like should I even exist sort of thing. But I think Romeo and Juliet touches on that depth that he usually touches on, but talking about love in different ways, whether or not it's about familial love or their relationship and the dichotomy between passion that is love centered passion and hate centered passion is just so on display in this text. So that's all I'll say about that. It always confuses me why Romeo and Juliet is like number one. I think I understand it, but like at the same time, he has so many great works. And like that's why we chose to start with this, obviously, because Romeo and Juliet has impacted our culture so much.
100%. My next question for us is: are there different versions are different versions of the same text necessary? Is it important to have different visions of a same text? Um, and so I'll kind of start off, and then you can kind of follow up. But so this past year, I went to see Scotland and PA with some friends off Broadway. So for those that don't know, it's a modern day remake of Macbeth that was originally a film before coming to the stage with music added. Um, I just thought it was really cool that I knew the story, but seeing it through a new set of eyes, was quite powerful. Um, I think new and newly renovated versions are necessary to reach a larger audience, to connect us as a people. Because not everyone is going to relate to the same material, the same concept. But if we branch it out, then more people can relate to that, and then it will come back to the centerfold. Um, Last year, I also came across a graphic novel for Romeo and Juliet. It was really cool. Um, and it's actually published by No Fear Shakespeare, the same people that have like the double-sided regular text with like a newly updated version. Um, and it actually helped a student who would otherwise have not have read the text or had more difficulty reading the text read it. So I thought it was really cool how like they made it into this more visual piece, since maybe not everyone can perform it, but they can at least visually see a graphic novel and still read the text from there. So I thought that was cool.
Right. It is important to have different versions of the same text, especially when it comes to this kind of text, when we're talking Romeo and Juliet. Um, and just the emotion of Shakespeare needs to be brought through to different audiences in different ways, because that's the only way that the true meaning of the text will shine through to everyone, because everyone's different. So essentially, I similarly had another experience to you, that I went somewhere and I saw Shakespeare in a completely different way, and it just like made me think about it in a different way.
Is this the
So
Globe
I went to
story?
see
I'm
it's the Globe
excited.
Theater. So I went to see Midsummer Night's Dream at the Globe Theater in London, and I thought it was really cool because I could have a beer, and
I need to get
it was
there.
just really fun. And we were all just standing out there together, almost like we were in at a concert, like a general admission mosh pit
Right,
kind of
that's how they did
concert.
it.
That's how they did it. And we were at the Globe Theater, and it was so cool. They recreated Midsummer Night's Dream as a Bollywood story.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there was a lot of like Indian culture like put into it, and it was just really neat, and it was very modern. And man, it was so awesome. Like I don't know if like it's completely necessary to have added a Bollywood version to Midsummer Night's Dream,
Right.
but it did bring out like other aspects of the text that like my modern brain just needed a different perspective to
Yeah,
like
and it's cool
understand
bringing
it.
in a different
Um,
culture and still having it
yes.
make the same, like fit the same story.
Exactly. Exactly. So it just makes it easier for different readers to relate to the story, and it's just fun. So that's why I think when it comes to Romeo and Juliet in particular, with all of the debate that goes on with it, I think it's important to show it in as many lights as possible, for people to try and get the real purpose behind what Shakespeare was saying. And with that, I'm actually going to add a little follow up question. Um, let's talk spin off series. So, I want to talk to you about movies because you know Romeo and Juliet has been remade a lot. And you're going to talk probably some of those movies that were just Romeo and Juliet stories that were modernized. And then I want to talk West Side Story after that
Ah,
too. So,
yes.
what main yes, you know it. But what main differences are there in the movies that you've seen, and are any of those relationships more bearable, possibly, than like the original Romeo and Juliet? And why do you think that is?
All right. So I know I'll start with our classes. So in class, we look at two different movies. Um, One being the Baz Luhrmann, the 1996. That one has Leonardo DiCaprio in it. And
Oh
right,
yeah,
Leo. And the other one that we look at
Leo.
is the more traditional, and earlier published or produced one was Franco Zeffirelli. And that one everyone calls the Troy Bolton movie because uh, the actor
Because he looks
Leonard,
like Troy
he looks
Bolton.
exactly,
I
yeah,
get
yeah.
it.
Um, so I'll talk that one. The Zeffirelli one is more of the classic version of it. Um, it is set in the older days, and the storyline kind of aligns straight through the acts. Um, so if you are looking for, if you're like, I'm in this quarantine, I don't necessarily want to read Romeo and Juliet, but I'm kind of interested in it. I would highly recommend the Zeffirelli version because that is the most like um, put together for Romeo and Juliet. Um, The other one, the Baz Luhrmann, because it is set in 1996, it's a total 90s flick. It is so crazy how they set this up. The kids freak out when they watch this one. The opening scene is just, I don't know if it's funny or if it's just like so absurd that I'm like, what? Um, they changed the setting. So what's really cool, so it stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, and even Paul Rudd makes an appearance. Um,
Paul
I
Rudd.
know,
I
right?
see. I've never seen this movie, but I need
You
to.
should. So they changed the original um, play is set in Italy, obviously. They move it to a beach and a metropolis area. Um, and some changes that are made are just like the introduction, because it's modernized. They, instead of swords, instead of swords, they use guns,
Swords.
swords. instead of
Swords.
instead of swords, they use
You're
guns.
gonna say it
I know,
again.
I'm sorry. Their costumes when they go to the ball, it is like a costume party, so their costumes reflect their characters in a sense. So, for example, Romeo is dressed in like this knight in shining armor,
Of
whereas,
course he
right,
is.
and then not Romeo, Juliet is dressed in like an angel
Romeo and
outfit,
Romeo. Whole
right?
different story.
That would be a different story. Juliet is dressed in this angel outfit, so it kind of just like shows their character and like the lovey-dovey setting that they're going to be in soon. Um, they update the rivalry, so it's actually two companies that are going against each other. Um, and they also introduce drugs into the storyline, um, just to like mix it up a little bit, make it more I guess
Modern,
like
I guess.
modern and almost like acceptable as to like how Romeo gets into the whole situation with forgetting about Rosaline and focusing more on Juliet. And they
Hmm.
changed the whole ending. Do I agree with it? I don't know. They don't. It's not the same as West Side Story, which we'll get to that shortly. But like he
Yes.
doesn't kill Paris. And right at the end, they try to create this emotional scene where Juliet wakes up as he is drinking um, the poison. So he realizes that she's alive, and then he dies. And then she's like, "Oh
Uh,
no!"
oh my
So then
gosh.
she, instead of, like I said, instead of a knife, she uses a gun, and um, so they kind of do that little twist to kind of build more anticipation, that kind of thing. Um, so I think they're both very good. Um, but yeah, the 90s um,
An
the
interesting
90s
time.
rendition is definitely uh, a,
An
a fun
interesting
one.
one
Yeah.
to put forward. Does it make their relationship any different?
I don't think it makes it different. Like I said, the older one kind of replicates it to the same par. And the other one, I think they try to focus more on the relationship than what's going on in their families. So I think they kind of, with their visuals, with the color, um, the costumes and everything, they try and focus more on the character and their love story. So does it work? I think for some people it does. I mean, it's Leonardo DiCaprio
True.
falling for a girl, so like,
Oh, you
you know,
know
some
it.
people are like all about that. But for me,
Yes.
I think it was good. Yeah, it was all right.
It was all right. Yeah, and so like I didn't see those movies, so I can't comment on it, but I do know that a lot of people love the Leo version of
Oh,
it,
for sure.
which I
The kids are
I need
excited
to
when
get
that
to
one comes on.
watching it. I wonder why that is. But so then I want to talk West Side Story because West Side
Yes.
Story is called like a modern Romeo and Juliet or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But honestly, there are a lot of differences to it that I think completely changed the relationship.
It does.
And like while you were saying that like there are differences in those other movies but it's
They
still
don't
Romeo and
correct. They
Juliet
don't. It
when it
doesn't
comes down to
change
it.
the relationship to a drastic measure. Where I think where you're going to get with West Side Story, I agree. Like it definitely does change the relationship for sure.
Yeah. And like West Side Story, I love West Side Story. And
Me
honestly,
too.
I am right now making a mental note that we need to make an entire episode on Tony
Um,
and Maria. Um,
I'm really
and
bummed.
we're gonna have to have
I'm really bummed. I was
why?
supposed to go and see West Side Story on Broadway because they just
No,
released a new version of it on Broadway. I was
get out.
yeah, so
I'm
I'm really bummed
sorry.
that
Maybe
they
they'll put it online or something so we
maybe.
can
I
all
mean,
watch
I
it
don't think it's
together.
closing, but my opportunity was canceled. So maybe I'll have to make my own
Oh.
opportunity to go up and see it.
Well, we'll make it happen, Devin.
We'll
Don't you worry.
make it
But
happen.
as far as like West Side Story
Mm-hmm.
goes, I can't get over it. There are some structural differences, right? Character differences and more. But I think the main thing that appeals to me about Tony and Maria is that they seem genuinely in love. Whereas you look at Romeo and Juliet and you think it's such like there is an aspect of Tony and Maria that, oh, they're young, like whatever, but it just seems so much more genuine than the 14-year-old like Romeo and Juliet or however old, because I think Romeo's older than her. Um, but maybe it just comes from the fact that it's a modern adaptation. But I think there are actual differences that make their relationship different. For example, in the beginning, we don't see Tony obsessing over another girl, which is
Ugh.
something I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But why would Shakespeare include the fact that Romeo is obsessing over Rosaline or whatever?
And
Why would
like
he include
whining
that if it
about
didn't
it.
mean something? Exactly. And like when it comes to West Side Story, Tony does not do that. He's just sort of like a level-headed guy who's working and he's like, "Oh, whatever happens, happens." And then it happens and his life is changed.
Mm-hmm. He
So
doesn't go back to
that's
the
really
gang.
awesome. Right, he doesn't go back to like he's healthier. Whereas Romeo like shuts out everyone and just goes and kills himself at the end. Like not healthy. But a scene that like I know we're going to talk more about if we have a an episode on these two. The scene I love that like makes me feel that genuineness to their relationship is that scene where they give their vows in the dress shop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it kills me. You know, I literally had this song playing at my wedding, "Make of
Mm-hmm.
Our Heart One Heart" or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so beautiful, and they just love each other, and it's so clear. And I think the main point that proves that their relationship is a little bit different is at the end, Maria walks off. Tony dies because of the craziness that's going on, because he tries to stop it with the rift that's going on. And Maria doesn't die. She doesn't see him dead and kill herself. She walks off and she lives her life, right? And they really wanted to get away together. They weren't just two young, foolish people, but they wanted the world to accept them and they wanted to be together. And when that didn't happen, it's not like Maria was like, well, the world can't deal with me and Tony, so I'm going to kill myself. Sort
Mm-hmm.
of like Romeo and Juliet did.
Right.
But rather she lived her life and she lived it having been better for knowing him. And
Correct.
that's why I love that
Right.
story.
I think it makes it much more
And it
powerful. You really get a
it
sense of like the pain
does.
that surrounds their constrained relationship.
It really you do because you really feel like they actually cared about each other and it's not just like a lusty sort of
You're not wrong.
14-year-old dramatic relationship. But you know, you just feel it so much more deeply in West Side Story.
With that being said, we're going to move into our next question. And this one, it would be crazy if we did not talk about this. The timeline of this play.
Yes.
Can can you just please talk about this real quick? Can we talk about this?
Yes. Absolutely, absolutely. And so here's my thing about the timeline, right? I just reread this story and I feel like when I was in high school, I remember it felt like it was long because I had to get through all that really,
Because it
really
takes you
tough
so long
Shakespeare
to get
stuff.
through the entirety of the text in school. Right.
Exactly,
So it
exactly.
feels a lot longer.
But I literally I just reread Romeo and Juliet to get ready for this episode, and holy crap, they move quick. Like, what was it, 3
It was 4
days that
days.
it took
4
them? 4 days.
days.
Whatever it was. Like, I was reading it and I was like, "Oh, I'm already at this scene where they're, like, married?"
Oh,
It was,
okay.
like,
Yeah, I
10 minutes after
understand.
I started reading. And it's like the fact that such intense emotions are brought forth in the span of just a few days, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But obviously, like younger relationships just like never make much sense. And that's how like
Correct.
these
But I
relationships
think the
form.
younger
So
relationships are the ones that have that amount of intensity as well.
definitely, definitely. And that's why it is more realistically a young person
Correct. Instead
relationship
of
because it happened in 4 days. But then they literally kill themselves.
hmm
And my problem is Romeo was in love with another woman the day before.
hmm
So,
hmm
and like we probably won't talk much more. Like I don't know if you have anything else to say about the timeline, but it's just something that needs to be noted that this young man was literally like, Mercutio, I'm in love with this girl. And Mercutio was like, you'll find another one at the dance, like making all these sexual references. And then like he did find another one at the dance, but this was the one that he chose to die
hmm
for, which is like, what if he just lived
Mind-boggling.
a couple another of days? Would he have found someone
Right.
else that he was obsessed with? Like,
Just
I don't know.
kidding.
Yeah. It's like, okay, dude.
Yeah. Like
Um,
I can accept that Juliet is only 14 while Romeo is in his later teens. I can accept that concept. Okay, it's the older days, everything moved a little bit faster. They got married when they were younger. Got it. I accept that. What I don't get is how 4 days qualifies as a lifetime of love that you are willing to die for someone. I don't
yeah.
get
I-
it.
and I think that's part of what Shakespeare's trying to say.
hmm
It's a cautionary tale
Yes.
more than anything. Like, okay, kids, like you think this is your ideal relationship? Well, maybe not because they didn't really love each
Right.
other and they died in 4 days. But we're going to talk more about that
Right.
later.
I think it just amazes me how fast they move. And
Oh yeah.
the adults, quote
Yeah.
unquote, presented in the text do not help in the situation.
No, they don't. And they just like push things along by
Correct.
trying to like marry
And
her
I'll talk
off
about
to
later
someone
because
else and
I have two that I have an egg with, and we'll get to that.
oh boy, an egg. Did you say an egg?
Yeah. I've got some
There's an
bones
egg
to
with it.
pick.
This is great. Okay. Well, moving on from the
Yes,
egg that
sorry.
we
I'm
just
sorry.
picked. um what what is one of the biggest driving forces in the text? You know, we have themes such as teen drama and rebellion and love and meddling and destiny, you know, etc. So what is it that you think is the biggest driving force?
Uh, um, I'd probably have to. Obviously, we'd be wrong to not say that team drama. I think team drama is a huge part of it, but more specifically, I think rebellion is one of the underlying like motivators. Um,
Yep.
the teenage rebellion story. We have it every like couple of decades. We see it in music. We see it in um, uh, culture that is produced during those
Yep.
times. When we first meet Juliet, she is a quiet, obedient, and innocent young lady.
Yep.
And she is emphasized throughout the text, throughout the entire play, a majority of it, for how young, pure, and innocent that she is. Um, so
Yeah.
when she meets Romeo, this is her first real decision to do something for herself. It's her first stand up to her parents and be like, sorry, I'm not going to do what you say. I'm going to marry this guy anyway. Um, and we see this develop as she stands up to her father later um, about the proposal for marriage from Paris. But like, you just see how she goes from this quiet, obedient lady, I'm going to do this for myself. And now I'm like, sorry, Dad, it's not happening. So I think that is a huge driving force throughout the rebellion. And the other one, so getting to my egg,
Your
the
egg.
nurse,
Bring up
the
your egg.
nurse and Friar Lawrence, they infuriate me. I don't under.
Poor Friar Lawrence was just trying to do a good deed by the
No, no, he's
families.
not. I don't understand why they meddle in the midst of this. They know that this is such
Yeah.
a touchy touch. Like the entire city knows about these two households, and the friar is like, you know what? I think I can solve this. I'm like, no, you can't.
Well, it's a commentary on parental figures too. Like, because ultimately, Friar Lawrence and the nurse are more parental figures. Like, obviously, their real parents aren't there
Correct.
for them at
They
all.
are the literary mentor parental figures instead of
Yeah.
their parents because their parents literally sideline them throughout the text.
And they don't always know what's best for you.
Hmm.
And like that's clear in this whole like the nurse just wants to marry her off
And I
and Friar
understand
Lawrence is
that they
like,
want to try and heal this relationship between the two families. I understand that that is their main goal. But going about it in this sneaky manner is not healthy for the couple or right in morality reasons. Like it's just
you
not
know it, Devin.
good. So
You
they
know it.
arrange a secret wedding. They arrange for them to have some hanky panky time. They arrange for this fake
Friar
suicide.
Lawrence, what are you
They
doing,
arrange for this
sir?
fake suicide to take place. And all the time that this is happening, Friar's like, okay, Romeo, you gotta slow down. But he's also encouraging him to move faster throughout it as
To speed
like,
up. Yeah.
you're giving me mixed signals here. Tell me what you want from me.
Ah,
So
the two of them are just like I envision them as like little
don't get me
yentas,
wrong,
like
like I love
from
the
Fiddler on
characters.
the.
I love them, but I
Yes,
also like they also infuriate, which is what makes them good characters.
they're little like matchmakers,
Yes.
and they're little like mischievous, wanting to get involved in their own
Yeah,
ways. But there could be honestly we could do a whole
I'm sure.
discussion on these characters. But
So
yeah, for
what's your opinion on that?
ah, so as far as like the biggest driving forces. ah, I don't know, like teen drama's a part of it. Most definitely. They're teenagers and it's clear. But I think maybe the real force behind a lot of it is romance in its best and worst forms.
Mm,
So I think Shakespeare really wanted to focus on maybe an unhealthy type of love and something that he saw around him a lot. And maybe it was a cautionary tale to young people that don't let your emotions get the most of you. I mean, look what happens here.
right.
Um, and something else that I think comes up a lot is people talk a lot about fate and destiny. Fate and destiny as the
That
driving
is a
force
huge piece of it
behind
too.
Romeo and Juliet. Because of the nature of their deaths,
Hmm.
right? How they were doomed from the start. But I tend to think it's less a story about destiny and more of a story about saying, to hell with my future. Maybe in the name of what you think is desired destiny. Because ultimately, like, Shakespeare isn't commenting that this is a good destined thing that should have happened. Like, maybe it's more a commentary. What am I even saying? It's a commentary on how this idea of destiny and placing all of your marbles in this
Right.
idea of destiny
And
could be a
that's
bad
even where the
thing.
term star-crossed lovers comes from. The
Right.
destiny um, is tearing you apart in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then they looked to the stars to tell their destiny where they were supposed to go, and that is brought up in the text
Right.
as well. So, ah, it's all good.
No, I completely, yes, completely agree. So let's move on to our next question.
um, do you think this is true romance, or do you think it is out of convenience, or even out of lust?
Okay. I'm going to throw out. So I did some research on Spark Notes before we did this discussion, and they called it a relationship of convenience and lust. And to be
Hmm.
quite frank with you, I'm going to throw out the term convenience. I don't think that that's accurate. I'm going to explain why, but I
Okay.
definitely think there's lust there. Um, as far as Romeo goes, it was lust. But he didn't, I think it's not lust in a sense of Romeo knew that he was going after as a predator this girl. I think
Romeo was
Romeo,
a total horn dog in
he's a
this.
horn dog, but here's the thing. I think that he confused his lustful feelings for
For
love.
love. Oh yeah.
Because why if it was true like and like bad lust, he wouldn't have killed himself in the end.
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't have taken it so seriously. And something that I think proves that lust was part of it is Mercutio's quotes before they
He's
go
such a
into the
player. I
party.
love it.
When he's joking with Romeo and he's like, "You'll find a new woman," and he says the word prick like 100 times because it's supposed to be like a sexual
Hmm.
reference. I think Mercutio understood the situation better than Romeo, and he seemed more mature. But what he should have done was not joked with him about it and made him feel small, because teenagers hate that
Hmm.
and will always rebel against that. He should have talked to him about it as a true friend. And as much as I love
Right.
Mercutio, and I think that
He
he
did
did
mess up
not
in that
get what
manner
he deserved, he messed up there as being
with his best friend.
a mentor to Romeo and being his best friend. And I'm just, like I said before, I'm going to throw out the term convenience. Some make the argument that Juliet wanted to leave her parents' house, and like getting with Romeo was like the way to do that. I truly don't buy that. You know, I think she genuinely fell
Mm,
for this guy. I think from his point of view, it was lust. But from what I read of Juliet, it seems like an immature but genuine middle school esque type of love. Oh, he's pretty and he says pretty things to me, but that doesn't mean that it's not real. I don't think that she was trying to get out of her house. Like, she obviously didn't want to be married off to anyone
hmm.
else. And if it was just convenience, she would have married someone else to get out of there. So that's my thought on that. It was
I
definitely
agree.
lust related,
I agree.
but convenience, I'm not sure. What about you?
No, those were my complete thoughts. I'm agreeing 100% on all those aspects. Like Mercutio, while he's being a player, like he should have been there. He should have been able to,
Yep.
um, like make those jokes, but also like bring it into the real situation. Like, um, that's all good and all, but keep in mind like you need to be healthy as well. Um,
Yep.
and I think being his friend, I think that was the best way for. I think that was his intention. It just didn't come off that way to Romeo, which,
Right.
eh, okay.
Which
Um,
changed things in a bad way.
right. Um, and that's pretty much. I agree. Like Romeo, like I said, was a horn dog, and Juliet kind of just. It's one of her first decisions in her life, like I said. So she was
Yep.
all head over heels for this guy. Um,
Yep.
so I think hers was more of an almost pure, not pure, but just like more intentional love, whereas his was more like, this is what I want, and oh, I think I also might have feelings for her at the same time. So it's kind of like
Right.
this overlapping of the feelings.
Exactly. Exactly. So that definitely covers that. And then moving on to this question that I think is so funny. Romeo, is he a stalker or is he a lover? What would you call Romeo?
I love it. Uh, I guess it cracks me up. Romeo, I think, is definitely a stalker. Um, the scenes in the movie are just too funny. Like in both
Yes.
iterations, they're just hilarious how they portray it, and I think
Yeah.
it just fits the scene so well. My students crack up when they see it. Um,
Yes.
they can't get past the creepy, awkward nature of it, and it's
Yeah.
because it's literally this.
He just
He
shows
shows
up
up and it's
everywhere.
outside of her room, and I'm talking about the balcony scene. Like he shows up outside of her room and he's just hiding in the trees or sneaking and climbing up to her balcony. It's just so funny how it goes about. Um,
Throwing it back to Tony in West Side Story when he shows up to the balcony. Oh my God, I swoon at it, but still creepy. Go ahead.
so I think it's a weird line that is played out um, between stalker and lover, and
Mm-hmm.
I think he balances it out. So that's why I can't like, necessarily say like, oh, he's totally like a creeper or he's more of a lover because I think he managed because the the looking the is almost um like accepted or appreciated by Juliet. While it startles her at first, like she's almost like, "Oh my gosh, he's here!" Or "He's here! I can't get
Right.
over it." Um, and Romeo's so smooth how he talks to her, um, the pickup lines. He knows how to like talk to her. So in my mind, the love is pure, but I could totally see a spin-off, like another version of this, like we talked about earlier, more like the Netflix You, where it's like
Yep.
it
Oh
could
my
almost be like
gosh.
a creepier version of Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. Yes. And so my response to this question,
Hmm.
he's definitely a stalker. You're 100% right. Like, he's a creep. But I don't think that that means he's not a lover
No.
either. I think Romeo is a natural born lover. And whether that means like truly loving someone, whether it's a good or a bad
Hmm.
thing, I think he knows just what to say and just what to do to get the girl and to make her swoon. And I think that that makes him a lover, but a creepy lover at that. So this question is really, it's a very
Hmm.
interesting one. But moving on.
So moving in from that discussion, what were some of the best and almost some of the worst ship moments that we've seen in Romeo and Juliet?
Yes, this is going to be my favorite part to talk about. So unfortunately, I think I have more bad and awkward than good, but I'll start with the good because they are there. Obviously, we were saying that a lot of people are captivated by the story, and I, okay, I know that you mentioned this was kind of creepy, the balcony scene, but I love that
Oh no,
scene.
yeah, it's definitely like their most
It
iconic
drives me
scene.
crazy, not in like a weird way, but it drives me crazy because it's so iconic in the yearning of a young
Hmm.
person. Like we are distant from each other. We're far away and yet we're close. Like obviously my parents won't let me off of my balcony, but I'm still here with you,
Hmm.
you
And
know.
their monologues are so good too. Like I remember when we had to memorize our monologues in class.
Oh my
Uh,
god. I know.
but I think that helped in and like in doing so, we definitely helped us learn the language and to understand the words and the true meaning behind the words that they were saying.
Yep.
Um, so I think it just
Yep.
became a little bit more real, and the
Yep.
the the two monologues separate that they performed there are just so good. Um,
They're
they're
beautiful.
beautiful.
I remember when I was, so I did the Juliet
Hmm.
one. Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? My favorite part of it is when she talks about denying her name for him.
Right,
And like that
and
to
so
me is
genuine.
like, yes, it's like an acceptable, like it's weird a little bit, but it's an
Hmm.
acceptable yearning
Right.
rather than I'm going to kill myself sort of yearning. It's
Hmm.
the acceptable, like, I am so in love with you that I want to give up something of myself to
Hmm.
you. Like it just, it sounds a little weird in our modern society, but I feel like that would have been a plausible relationship. Where it goes in the end is not so plausible. But the
Correct.
teenagers on the balcony, like I love it. It's such a good scene for it. Like the scenery is perfect to describe what they're feeling, and they also just
Hmm.
like so eloquently speak. Yeah. But okay, moving on
Some of
to
your
some
bad
of
moments.
my not so favorite ships. Um, so a bad moment that I it bothers me so much is when Tybalt dies and Romeo's like, "Yo, I'm sorry." Well, he doesn't even go to her first. I'm thinking West Side Story. When Tybalt dies, Romeo has killed him, and the nurse tells Juliet, and Juliet is like mad at first, and she's like, "Romeo is like he's a what does she call him? Like she calls him all these oxymoronic
Right.
terms. Like he's a bad saint and all these sort of things in better words.
Hmm.
Obviously, I can't think of it right now, but." Then, within a second, she turns around and she starts saying, "Oh my gosh, like, I'm such a bad wife. How could I have been against Romeo for a moment?" And she starts crying that he's banished. And I'm like, bro, your cousin just died at the hands of this guy that you met 3 days ago. Like, do you want to question that a little bit?
Hmm.
And it just bugs me so, so
Right.
much. But,
See, I have mixed feelings here. I agree with you. I agree with you in
oh,
some regards, but I also see a bit of development here. With
okay.
Juliet, I see it as like she is torn between her loyalties, her loyalty to her family through the death of Tybalt, and also the love for her husband. So
I like that.
her two worlds that were once separated, her family and Romeo, have now collided, and I don't know. It's just crazy to see like she's no longer in this fairy tale love story. She has to accept that love is not perfect. It's messy. And it's usually, but it just doesn't usually end with a dead cousin and your husband being the murderer.
So like I completely agree. Like that's actually a good perspective. It shows her conflicted
Hmm.
nature in all
Like
of this.
I like
Um,
having performed that in class. The kids are so confused about it, and I understand that because it's that
yes.
moment is so confusing, and I don't understand it myself wholly at times. But I
Right.
see her mentally making that decision in her mind, going back and forth between her two loyalties. Is she going to be loyal to her family, or is
Exactly.
she going to be loyal to her new family in a sense?
Exactly. No, I get that 100%. I do understand, but I think at the same time it just makes me really angry because looking back at it, I'm like, that's super
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy. But yeah, so we technically kind of agree on that. And then lastly, I mean, this is a cliche thing for me to say, but I think it's important. Their deaths are so contrived and they seem so like created. Obviously they were written about, but it doesn't feel romantic to me. And I don't think it's meant to either. It doesn't even feel like a tragedy sometimes. Like it just feels like an empty ending. The way that they one died and then one woke up and then the other died, it seems so contrived and it feels empty. And then their families come together and it's like, ah, okay, like I guess this must have been the real goal of the story, like
Right.
the changes in their family's dynamic. But it's just not satisfying for their
See, I
relationship for
think
me.
it's different if you see it,
Mm-hmm.
because then you naturally in theater you become more absorbed in a character's relationships, when you are
Right.
seeing it live. So I feel like if depending on how you feel about this, if you see it, you can kind of feel more for the characters that are going through it.
Right.
Because I agree, like one death then another, like it kind of like almost defeats the purpose. But I think that's also what Shakespeare's trying to get across. Like death does
Right.
not fix something. Like because you think this is right, it doesn't fix it. But
Right.
it does in the end.
100%. No, you're 100% right.
So our next question for us to diagnose, to get into, is what was Shakespeare's motive or message with Romeo and Juliet? Was it a love at first sight story, or was there something deeper hidden within it?
Yep.
Go ahead, Steph.
Um, so I think that we've kind of addressed
Yes, we
this,
have
but I think
already.
it's important that we do address it
Specifically.
in itself. Yeah. So I don't think the message of Romeo and Juliet is, quote, like, this is how a true and passionate love story should look,
Mm-hmm.
unquote, right? I think it's deeper than that. I think Shakespeare ultimately was trying to show us a cautionary tale of two young lovers who got in too deep. And maybe how passions running wild never end up good. You know, passions in the lustful relationshipy sense, but also passions in the running hot against an enemy
Mm-hmm.
sense that their family has against each other. These are two ends and extremes of
Right.
passion. And ultimately, both lead to the death of two young
Mm-hmm.
people in the name of love.
Several
So I think
people.
it's just, yeah, of several people in the name of quote
Love.
unquote love and like quote unquote family. And I think what we see in the end is their understanding that it was all of that and all of these layers of bad
Yeah.
passion that led to
And
these
you really get to
deaths.
see like
Um,
lust corrupts the pure nature of a relationship. It kind of like
yes.
darkens it in a sense, and you see that come to
Especially in
yeah,
literature, you can always
yes,
tell.
yeah, and you see that come to life in this story as well. Um, and I think it is. I
But
think it
yeah.
is a story of a failed love, from the
Yep.
start. Like, and I think we're supposed to, as an audience, see it and be like, okay, now I know what I'm not supposed to do. I'm not supposed to rush into love.
Right.
I'm not supposed to be wholly about, um, in the sense that it's all about the physique. It's all about the passion. No, it has to come from a deeper
Mhm.
sense of understanding. Um,
Yes. No, that's 100% right. So now getting to that final
mm,
question that is very philosophical and less about Romeo and Juliet, but more about what their relationship means
mm-hmm.
and how we can take something from it. So the last question is love at first sight. Is it real? What are your thoughts on love at first sight?
See, I find that so hard to answer because I'm so conflicted about it. The romantic in me obviously wants to say, duh, yes. And there are people out there that will claim this till their deathbed. Romeo, not intended for Romeo and Juliet. um, but is love at first sight is love at first sight real? I have no idea. Like, however, I will say that there's a magic about love. There's a spark to love.
You're so right,
Um, it
Devin.
can't be contained. It cannot be replicated. Like there's no way to reproduce the same feeling. Um, can there be an attraction at first sight? Yes, 100%.
Yep.
But the big word, the L word, like love, I don't know if I'm fully sold on that. I think you can be attracted at first sight and, um, come into the idea that yes, I could potentially see myself with that person, but I don't know if it's
Right.
love at first sight. So
Right. And like you said, like this is an impossible
Mm-hmm.
question to answer. But I think in any like modern brain, especially in my modern brain, the one that sort of fed the belief that we can make it work with anyone and there's never just one right person for one another. I want to say no, that love at first sight is not a thing. Like it's something that's built over time. And if I were forming an opinion just based on Romeo and Juliet and what we've read here, I'd probably say no, love at
Mm-hmm.
first sight is not a thing. But kind of like you said, I don't think love is completely without magic, though. And I don't think I could ever buy into a definition of love that was exclusive and followed a particular
Mm-hmm.
rule. Have I ever seen love at first sight in my own life or in daily life among other people? No, I've never seen it in action, but I think, like I said, there's something so much more magical and real about true love than many people will credit love with these
Right.
days. Whether or not it has to look like two people throwing their lives away for each other, there is something to be, there is something to the destined
Mm-hmm.
lover. In my mind, at least, there's something to that one person. And who knows if it's true or not. But I couldn't answer this question either. And I think that's where everyone kind of falls on this
Let us
question.
know if you have an if you have an opinion about this. Please let us know. Like because
Yes.
clearly we're conflicted. So like maybe you are as well, or maybe you have like your solid answer. So share it with us if you want. We'd be happy to hear it as well.
Yes,
Which gets us into our
exactly.
next section almost.
Yes, the fun
I'm so excited for
section.
this. So we're going to address some of the comments that we've received from our audience. We had a lot of feedback. Most of it was not so keen on the Romeo and Juliet relationship.
Yep.
However, we had some differing opinions. So,
Yeah, and so what I love about Romeo and Juliet is people get real hot about it. They get real mad about it. So we're gonna just bring up some comments. We picked 4 from the ones that we'd
hmm
received that we thought kind of really spoke to what we were talking about. First, we're gonna hear from Kalia. Thank you for reaching out, and we're
thank
just going to
you.
read your email. And if anyone else wants to join in, go to or send us an email at weshipitpodcast@gmail.com or go to our website, which is also going to be linked in the show notes.
Beautiful.
But so Kalia, let's see what she had to say. First of all, I would like to preface this by saying that Mercutio deserved better. My man was just trying to chill with his friends and then got straight up murdered because of a family feud that doesn't even involve his family. He deserves so much better. Kalia, yes.
We agree. We
Couldn't have
wholly
said
agree with
it
this.
better myself. Poor Mercutio. But anyway, going back. Anyway, on to Romeo and Juliet. Like everyone, I read Romeo and Juliet as a pimple-faced, braces-wearing high schooler. Yes, me too. And I went to an all-girls school, and I think 14-year-old girls tend to have this grand idea of romance in their head. So when you read Romeo and Juliet, your first instinct is to kind of be like, oh, romance, I want this in my life. But once we start actually dissecting the romance, which we talked about before, Devin, as
Right,
well,
with my classes, yeah.
yeah, as one does in ninth grade, all of us, super romantic 14-year-old girls realize, hey, maybe this isn't as romantic as we thought. I think the first thing that really got to us was the whole age thing. Juliet was just the same age as us reading in the class. And while some girls definitely had boyfriends, I don't think any of them would have imagined marrying them at our age. They may have loved their boyfriends, or at least the 14-year-old perception of love, but marriage, that was something only adults do. And Romeo was 17. And we all know 17-year-old boys are stupid like that. That's just a fact. I feel like that was the main revelation for me anyway, that not all great romances are, well, great. And we really appreciate that, Kalia. We really appreciate you reaching out and sharing your thoughts with us. So let us skip down to the next person who came in. Devin, you want to take that?
Yeah. Yes. So next we're going to hear from Julia. And she writes, I have mixed feelings. So I included 2 different sides. Romeo and Juliet's relationship is complicated. They definitely have an unhealthy relationship through how obsessive they are, to the point that they go out in secret and go as far as committing suicide to be together. Because they are so concerned with the other person, they don't act with self love. This is ultimately a problem because it takes loving oneself before someone can love another person. At the same time, though, their relationship is beautiful. They have an almost extreme version of agape love, unconditional love, in the way that they are so selfless as to not want to live without the other person. In a distorted way, this captures the promises of marriage because they love each other and are faithful not only up to death, but even after death. Also, their willingness to fight for their relationship is super honorable. Their families may not agree with their relationship because of their feud, but Romeo and Juliet see the value of their love. This also demonstrates the challenges of a relationship because couples experience struggles and must work through them, just as the literary couple worked through the odds stacked against them to an extent. The story is definitely not the ideal way for a relationship to function, but I also believe that some value can be extracted from it.
I love
Me
that.
too,
Like,
because it's something that we
that's
didn't talk
perfectly
about yet.
said. Right.
So I think it's really
I
cool.
think it's great because while most of the commentary we're going to hear is pretty negative, I think also Julia, you're right to say that there is something that can be extracted from that, just like total and unconditional love. And that's kind of what we see when it comes to Romeo and Juliet. I don't know, Devin, if you had any more comments on that.
No, I appreciated her version, like her insight in it, um, and how like we personally didn't look at it in this sense of loving someone so much that you're willing to, like, it's almost selfless. It's not like you're selfish about the person. You're not wanting to live in a world without them, but you're so selfless that you're willing to understand the responsibilities of a marriage. So I think that's cool.
100%.
All right, and with that, we're going to move on to our next comment. And this one comes from Antoinette. My main issue with Romeo and Juliet is that many younger students do not recognize the work as something that ought not to be emulated. I worked as a middle school English teacher for a while, and that is when William Shakespeare is usually introduced to students. And Romeo and Juliet is the first work they read. Instead of being horrified at the idea of unrequited love leading to death, they fantasize about a romance like Romeo and Juliet's. It almost seems as though the modern understanding of romance almost always requires a difficulty or pain. We see this all the time in other works of literature. Look at The Notebook. I'm sorry to be cliche, but it wound up being a modern love story. Noah and Allie's romance was not without heartbreak. In order for something to be romantic, it must be attached to pain. That is just absurd in my opinion. I understand the
Mm-hmm.
necessity plot in literature. Don't get me wrong, but to want difficulty in one's relationship leads to nothing but misery, and I wish younger students could see the issue with their yearning for that type of relationship.
Yes, Antoinette. I think you're 100% right. And I appreciate, thank you for reaching out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we talked a little bit about how going over it with your teacher and analyzing it might actually be a good thing, but I can also see how it's a bad thing if you don't take from it that this isn't a relationship to fantasize
Mm-hmm.
about. Do you know what I mean, Devin? Have you seen this with your own students?
I I don't think I have, but I also am a male. So I don't know. So I don't know.
Maybe they don't confide in you the
Right.
same way.
Correct.
Devin maybe isn't the one they're confiding in as much. Oh yes, yes, yes. That's where we were.
So yeah, I don't think because of that, I don't think they necessarily confide in me with how they feel about this. But from what I was like, me as a teacher perceiving it, I think they definitely, like I said earlier, like they really dissect it. When they dissected it, they were able to see the
Mm-hmm.
faults in it. So I think that kind of
Yep.
like helped take away the idea of like, oh, this is something that I need to yearn for myself. So
Right. And it just depends on the teacher that you
oh,
have, I
100%
guess.
as
Like,
well.
and it depends on the students that you have too.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, moving on to our last comment that we chose. This is from Katie. So she says, "Do not ship," which I think is going to be our ultimate, our ultimate decided thing here. But do not ship. But we were all crazy about the wrong person when we were 13, right? Right before Romeo meets Juliet and falls hard for her, he's complaining to his friend that Rosalie doesn't want to have sex with him. So upon seeing Juliet makes this huge gesture of love, likely out of his own interest, just to get laid. 100% true, Katie. Juliet, railing against her restrictive parents and predestined fate, finds that giving herself to Romeo born of her parents' enemies, would make a great escape. There's nothing mature in their relationship. It is pure teen rebellion and passion, but maybe that's what makes it legendary. They're really risking what they have for themselves, not for each other. And since they act rashly in their own interest, end up killing themselves in the process. Who does that? And I love this. And I think something that you said that stuck out to me is that they're really risking what they have for themselves and not for each other. Their love really does at points seem a little bit
Yeah.
selfish. I don't know, Devin, if you have thoughts on that
I
too.
I get the selfish parts of it, and like I see both sides. I see the selfish and I see the selfless sides of it. So it's just hard to really see whether or not this was, and that's why I think like it's a play, so it can be presented in two different manners. So that's why I think it's interesting how in two different comments we have this drastic divide.
And I think that Devin's so funny. We definitely do have a drastic divide, and I think that that's something that Romeo and Juliet does well. Is it creates a debate among people that they can further converse about what real healthy
Hmm.
love is. So maybe it's just a conversation starter. If nothing else, it's a good conversation starter about the topic. So yeah, I don't know if you had any other thoughts, Devin.
No, I'm good.
All right, cool. So it seems like the majority of people are not sure how to feel or do not ship this relationship. So thank you
Yes,
so
thank
much
you
to everyone
everyone.
who sent in their feedback. Now on to our next episode, so you can start sending in some more
Yes.
feedback.
Before we go, as Stephanie just mentioned, we would be remiss without introducing the next episode. So,
Yay!
our next episode is going to be on Gatsby and Daisy from The Great
Gatsby and
Gatsby.
Daisy. These two have such like a place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mainly because I feel bad for Gatsby, but we're gonna talk all about that. Um, yeah, it's gonna be fun. So
It'll be good.
please join us on our next episode and reach out. We'd love to hear your feedback on them. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you have any comments on the show or want to add some points for the next one, please reach out to us through email at weshipitpodcast@gmail.com or find us on social media.
Yes, so we can't wait for next time. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to our podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Yes, definitely engage with us. Peace out, lovers. Till next time. Adieu.